In today's episode, a 26-year-old plantation worker on the island of Sumatra begins spraying acacia trees with pesticide to kill weeds around the trees. Unbeknownst to him, he sprays a tiger hiding in the acacia roots, causing it to attack. Hit that like button and subscribe right now. This is the most recent Sumatran tiger attack as of 2024. Welcome to Final Affliction. The island of Sumatra is the only place where the endangered Sumatran tigers manage to hang on for dear life. There are less than 400 left in the wild, unlike their cousins, the Bali and Javan tigers that have already died out completely. Sumatra is doing all they can to keep them safe, but this is proving to be an uphill battle. Between the 60 million inhabitants of the country and the ever-expanding cities and farmlands, their living space is getting less and less. Inevitably, humans and wild animals can't avoid running into each other from time to time. The difference between Sumatran tigers and the more famous Siberian tiger is mostly their size. Siberians clock in at over 600 pounds, sometimes more. But the Sumatran tiger reaches between 400 and 500 pounds. But make no mistake, the slight difference in size doesn't make the Sumatran any less dangerous. And now, even in 2024, we're hearing of more and more attacks from these already terribly endangered creatures. Most of them happen on the outskirts of the jungle or on farmlands. There is nowhere else for them to hide, so where are they supposed to go? That brings us to May of 2024, when the morning dawned and the farm workers began to move out into the fields. On this acacia plantation, situated in the Riau district, it was weeding day. Workers went out in their protective masks with tanks strapped on their backs, laying down a poisonous weed-killing spray to keep the precious acacia trees safe. This plantation lies almost entirely in conservation land, set out specifically to protect the tiger's habitat. When large swatches were set out years ago, these farms already existed, and that's why they fall into conservation land to this day. These acacia plantations are so thickly grown that they resemble the jungle enough to attract animals taking shelter in the night. Finding a monkey, a peacock, or even a rare visit from a sun bear isn't all that unusual, and most people know the laws, and they and the animals usually stay out of each other's way. The day is for the humans, and the nights are for the animals, an agreement that is mostly kept peacefully between the two groups. The three men that set out had all been working on the plantation for 5 years or more. They were out just as the sun began to peek over the horizon, and the bats were still getting settled for their day's sleep, chittering off in the distance, their sounds joining the birds that were beginning to wake up to seize the daylight. Splitting off in separate directions to cover more ground, the men set off just as the animals were starting to scuttle back into the deeper jungle. The mist from the poisonous spray was irritating their sensitive noses. The noise from the pumps and the men themselves were not like those in the deep forests, making them even more nervous, but none more so than the aforementioned Sumatran tiger that had taken shelter in the crevice of a particularly big tree's roots on the far right side of the field. It slunk back deeper into its hidey hole when it heard the footsteps crunching over the leaves coming closer and closer. But unfortunately, the 26-year-old worker was rather good at his job, not missing a single tree as he moved between the rows. The tiger shrank back as far as he could go under those roots, leaving only its face barely visible from the hollow it had dug for itself the night before and the leaves and roots that added extra camouflage. When our young farm worker came by, he didn't even notice the striped orange face peering out from ground level when his hose went by. The already nervous tiger would have probably stayed right where it was until the strange human passed it, leaving the young man none the wiser that there was such a fearsome predator lying hidden just a foot away from his work boot. But that was not the case. Instead, that spray nozzle passed right over that tree's root system, giving the tiger a face full of pesticide right into its nose and eyes. The reaction was immediate. Snarling in pain and anger, it sprang from the hollow like lightning, pouncing straight onto the man in front of it. The spray had nearly blinded it, but the man was standing so close and directly in front of the animal that it just couldn't have missed, even without its eyes to detect him. When that orange blur streaked out from the ground, the man was completely caught off guard. He raised his arm instinctively in front of his face. The tiger's teeth grabbed onto his right hand, and the almost 300 pounds of beast slammed him to the ground, nearly tearing the hand away from the wrist socket when they skidded several feet on the ground, leaving a deep groove in the earth. Screaming hysterically, the man attempted to grab the tiger's head to shove it off, but it was no use. His hand was shattered, and he was already on the ground. All he managed to do was to spray the tiger's fur in a shower of blood from the profusely spurting wound on his wrist and hand. The next instant, his screams for help were cut short. The tiger had him by the throat in its death grip. All sound and air ceased to move through the man's airway. All he could do was struggle and claw at the beast on top of him. As the body of the struggling man beneath the creature began to lose his fight, becoming weaker and weaker from lack of oxygen, the tiger's eyes and nose began to clear from the stinging spray. The other two men had heard the screams for help. They dropped their equipment right where they stood and began running toward their friend without a second thought. Their heavy work boots pounded toward the scene, and they called for their colleague, alerting the animal of more approaching humans. The sheer amount of noise they were making as they ran toward him probably saved their own lives. The animal's eyes were cleared, but it was still in pain and half mad because of it. But it didn't feel like it could take on what sounded like many humans running toward it. So it took off into the trees, running toward the deeper jungle, leaving behind him a broken man lying in the leaves. When the workers arrived, he was already dead. The blood seeping into the ground was still warm. If he hadn't died from oxygen deprivation, then the wound on his neck would have bled out in seconds. His entire throat had been ripped out, leaving only tendrils and ribbons where there once was muscle and bone. Strands of orange fur were embedded beneath his nails as he tried to fight back. Authorities found the hollow and the footprints that led back into the forest. Given the evidence at the scene, this was not a tiger out to actively hunt humans, merely a terrible case of bad luck. But still they went out to search for it. No matter how few of the Sumatran tigers are left, a killer is still a killer, and it needs to be dealt with. But it seems that the creature was long gone, back in the jungle where it wants to be. Given its experience with the poisonous spray, it will probably be smart enough to avoid the acacia plantations altogether. Only time will tell, but it's unlikely that it'll ever be found. We'll know for certain in the next few weeks. As smart as tigers are, they have also been known to exclusively hunt humans after they've gotten their first taste of human flesh. And seeing how easy it can be to catch them, they just can't resist the easy meal. So now we wait and pray that this plantation worker will be the only one to meet his terrifying final affliction.